Welcome to the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I'm Beatrice Chestnut.
And I'm Uranio Paes.
And today we are talking to our friend and colleague, Chris Schoolcraft, who is a type 5. Welcome, Chris.
It's great to be here.
Chris, it's a growing club. People seem to be very interested in fives here on Enneagram 2.0.
Well, I'm glad I can be a part of the process.
Yes, they can be so mysterious, and it's great to have fives like you both who can unveil a bit of the mystery and talk so clearly and coherently about the inner world of a five. So excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, and Chris is an advanced student of ours and also an Enneagram practitioner. So he has a whole process behind him of self-development and understanding different dimensions, not only of his type, but of inner transformation. So very glad to talk to you.
Yes. So I always like to start at the beginning. So maybe, Chris, you could tell us how you first came to the Enneagram, how you first came to know you were a type 5.
Yes, it was for a lot of people that I talk to when they come to find their Enneagram or when the Enneagram finds them. We're all in different situations. I was actually in a very difficult situation. I'm a Christian pastor and I was pastoring a church at the time. And the challenges that I faced in that church and in that time led me through a season of burnout. And so, as I was struggling personally in my marriage, in my family, in all that I was doing in my work, I had never faced that kind of failure as I had, never in my career. And so, every defense mechanism that I had, every trick of the trade that I had used to navigate life was not helpful. And someone had tried to introduce me to the Enneagram. At first, I was resistant, which is not an uncommon trait for a 5, and because I didn't like to box people in. And the way that I was experiencing the Enneagram in the world around me at the time is that it was kind of being weaponized against people, or it was used to really talk about people, not increase connection with people. And so I was resistant at first, but finally the suffering was to the extent to which I turned back to it. And how I determined my type really was in the pathology of it. It was really an incredible outlay of every deep trouble I was having at the time. Being reclusive, doubting, isolating. And so I determined my type really from the deepest, darkest parts of the 5. And then what the 5 really what the Enneagram did for me is it said, oh, here are all the lies that 5s tell themselves. And this is how that impacts a 5. And I said, oh, great, I'm going to build a lattice work, the exact opposite of that. And so it became a ladder for me out of that place in my life.
Wow. Yeah. And it makes sense. I think sometimes people do come to the Enneagram when they really need something to help them understand what's happening. And the Enneagram, our personality type is a defensive self structure. So it makes sense that you saw like all the ways you were trying to defend or cope when you were going through a really, really difficult time. So that makes a lot of sense. And so what did you learn through learning that you were a 5 in that situation? How did it help you cope, like not just as a defense, but as understanding the defense and building that lattice work, as you say, by doing what 5s need to do to grow?
It was interesting. And maybe it's a little simplistic, but I just took everything that my defense wanted me to do, and I said, I've got to do the opposite of that. So for instance, my defense would say, oh, you don't need to engage people. I'm like, okay, today I've got to engage somebody I wouldn't engage. Oh, you shouldn't trust people. Okay, who am I going to decide to trust? I need to do one trusting thing today. Oh, you need to isolate. Okay, I don't need to stay at home or in my office or these things. I need to connect with people. You don't need to build relationships. Okay, I need to seek a therapist. It was everything that my personality was telling me not to do that was building a greater sense of constriction, and that I did the opposite of in very basic ways, because that was really at that time all the psychological and emotional capacity I had. I literally had to stand up in front of the church, hundreds of people, and bare my soul and tell them how afraid I was and how my fear was clouding my ability to lead at that time. So I was really, for all intents and purposes, just laid bare for that. And as a five, that was probably the scariest rock bottom moment for kind of the deconstructing of what that was.
Wow, so you shared all that in front of your congregation, so that sounds indeed like a scary nightmare for a 5.
No better words, scary nightmare, everything I would want to avoid. And I think that's the part where we learn that in our wounding, the wound is the door, right? It
Mhm.
is through the place that we often fear the most that we find a way through to the other side of that. And for me, that was part of my experience. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I love hearing this, Chris, and it certainly points out to a lot of courage and readiness for transformation. And I'm a 5, so I guess I'm going to rain a little bit in your parade now, because I experienced very similar things right when I learned the Enneagram a long time ago. And I think later I understood a few things, which were it hurts less for us to read or to listen to someone about our truths when it's in a non-individual or personal way, right? So then we create a plan and we go do stuff. I remember that I put myself also in so many uncomfortable situations right away, and I do think it's it's something brilliant, courageous. I'm not taking any merit from that, but there are also a few things regarding type 5 itself that we also might want to consider. It's like we do all of that provided that it's under our control and it's not someone else telling us what to do, for instance, right? And so it's something about testing new ways of doing, even unconsciously for learning purposes. Although I think that's a bit more for my subtype, social 5, than yours, and you'll talk about subtype soon. But I wonder if what I'm bringing up makes sense to you or not. It might not be your case. It was my case, though.
No, I think at the time it was the only way I knew how to operate was to control something. And that healing journey and being able to control that, or at least know it in my head, was a way for me to have some traction to keep my ego from probably falling apart.
Mhm.
I think through the journey, the letting go of control and the openness to whatever comes and handling whatever needs to happen in the moment is probably the greater part of opening my heart and just feeling whatever it is, um, to the greatest extent of vulnerability that I can, and allowing the resources to come up from that.
Yeah,
I think in my experience, at least at that time in my way, I had to press to make something happen. That was I need to
yeah,
make
yeah,
some, I need to save myself. I need to get here. And then through my journey, it's been, okay, I don't have to press. I can allow and I can surrender into that. And wherever it takes me, I can be present in that moment more and more. I don't do it all the time, but I don't have to be as dissociated or as forceful or as intense with that. I can just let it
right.
be. And that's been a greater part of the journey on this side of that.
Yeah, and then there is the thing of head types, not only 5s, of um, when we understand, it's more than half of the way. Like we commit to changing and doing something, and we resist way less. There's this very big, important thing called understanding the logics of the things, right?
Yes, and I think, my experience, yes, knowing is a part. It's almost like the container, that we can create of safety, of just knowing, conceptualizing, and that knowing can be in an emotional place. It can be in a mental place. It's just knowing and having a sense. of what reality is. Uh, for me, the greatest struggle is when I'm not sure what reality is, or think I know. Then that's a lot more vulnerable and scary place for me to live into.
So maybe it would be good for us to also hear at this point about your subtype journey. I know that when we first met you, you thought you were one subtype of type 5, and you've since shifted that. Can you maybe let us know how you related to the subtype level of the 5 journey?
Sure. When I first learned the Enneagram, my subtypes were not a part of that place. And
Hmm.
so I felt a lot of um, different experiences of what fiveness was. And so only once, whenever we began to learn subtypes and do that, did that really help me frame. I think at the very first part of my journey, I think I really identified more as a self-pres dominant five, and and that's changed. I believe I'm probably more of a sexual dominant five in the level of intensity and emotion and energy and anger I can bring to things. But because I learned the Enneagram in the midst of a traumatic moment in my life,
Hmm.
in terms of burnout and then going through divorce, and then I think really looking back on that, those traumas ruptured some very deep things that were going on from my family of origin around money, around provision. I believe I grew up in a family that experienced some financial trauma. So those things were really big themes in my life. And so coming out of that place, as I was learning the Enneagram and subtypes, I really leaned heavily into that. I was very secluded during my burnout. I was very concerned about resources, all those types of things. And
Hmm.
so I think for a while that felt like that was more available to me. Um, Over the last couple of years, I think I've leaned more into that. Well, really, I think I've become more aware of the nuance. And I really thought for a while I was self-pres, sexual, social, repressed. But I think over the last 6 to 8 months, this last year, owning the energy that I have, listening to people give me feedback as they experience me as a five. You don't feel like a lot of other fives that we interact with, and really embracing more of that has been helpful. So right now, I think I'm probably sexual, self-pres, social. Um, I think that overlay of financial trauma, I think that experience of those things still plays an important part. Um, and even though I pastor a church and lead from the front, that is not, my mind does not really move to how do I fit in this group? What is my role in this team? And so I still think that's a repressed subtype for me, the social side.
Yeah, and Chris, you went to many different retreats with us and self-disclosed and did very intense personal work, not only learning about the Enneagram as a system. And sometimes we see that fives avoid that. What do you think was the key for you to want to go there and do that? Do you think your subtype might be behind this, or your determination, or anything else?
Um, if I were to kind of pull threads, I think one, coming through organized religion, my desire, when I think about some of the motifs of a sexual dominant five, the idea of romanticism, the idea of purpose and passion and energy and intensity, from early on, part of my spirituality was really wanting to make a difference in the world, was really wanting to see and believe that there was a place that spirituality could play in the healing and in the improvement of life and conditions for people, and the minimization of suffering. And so I think we're coming out of the church and really having that desire and experiencing the Enneagram and seeing what it was doing for me and experiencing the alleviation of suffering and also the expansion of who I was. I really began to lean into those retreats, partly because if I were, I think in my mind at the time, if I'm going to do this work, then I've got to follow it all the way through. Where is this going to go? Who am I? I think part of that piece was the drive and intensity there. And then I think part of it was also, I want to share this with the world. If this
Yeah.
is a helpful tool and this is a helpful way for people, then what is it that it can bring to the world, and what can that be a part of? So I think those two pieces were really important.
Yeah, I think
Um,
it was therefore less about being a five or any other type. It was a readiness for change, and partly because of suffering. And we usually teach that this is an important ingredient for people to go do deeper Enneagram work, not just based in the curiosity for the Enneagram system.
right. Yeah, and I would agree that that alleviation of suffering and working through that and leaning into that. And I think as a five, trusting the two of you and the team that you put together and experiencing the growth wanted me to, I just it just drew me into wanting to continue to experience this part of what it was.
Mhm. And how has knowing you were 5 and then later a sexual 5, how has that impacted your relationships?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, with my family of origin, I don't know this for sure. My family's not all into the Enneagram, but my dad is probably a sexual five, and my mom's probably a social six.
Mm.
And so I think my relating and understanding, and I can feel some emotion coming up around just um, where it is. My father has stage 4 cancer. And so I've been moving through this time of life with him, and really leaning in and relating to him and seeing and understanding more of who he is and has been. And some of our connection has been very deepening for me. He was very aloof and distant for a long time, turned his intensity toward work and his own intensity toward his relationship with my mother. um, and so that's shifted. And so I think having a sense of my own sexual fiveness and the intensity and energy that brings helps me understand a little bit more about my father from what I see and understand of him. And it's actually helped our relationship at this time in his life and his transition. And then in terms of my mother, I have available to me at times I can really tap into a lot of anger and a lot of energy, usually around resentment. I believe in my mother's expression of her social sickness, rightness and wrongness, the black and white of that, the expectation of what that was. I think in my own sensitivity as a five, I experienced and internalized that, and it became part of my inner critic per se. And so recognizing where she was coming from, some of her motives, and being able to see with more clarity about our relationship and how important trust was and what she was trying to accomplish. And it really allowed me to relax some of my energy both internally toward myself and toward her, and has opened our relationship up more and has allowed me to set really good internal and exterior boundaries with her. So that's been really nice. And in and what's amazing is that in setting of the boundaries and in that relaxing inside of me and the internal pressure I can build, our relationship is open. And she actually shows me greater signs of trust and than we would have ever experienced in my life before.
Mhm.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
and in terms of my social life, I'm in a relationship with an incredible woman, a sexual six. And I think at first, from that self pres framework, I felt myself a little more defended and trying to protect in that my boundaries and my sense of space and all of that. I think what I realized as I've processed through this energy and intensity that I have access to is that I actually have greater flow in a relationship with her. What I realized for me as a five, especially having people around me who have a lot of anxiety or have access to a lot of that, I found myself very, I don't know if the right word, hyper aroused or dysregulated by it. And so would often want to protect myself, withdraw from it. What I really think I'm working on now is realizing the natural level of anxiety that I have stored in my body and in my nervous system and available to me. And when I'm around intense people or more anxious individuals, the discomfort is that I'm more aware of my own anxiety. And
Mm.
so, as a sexual five, I'm familiar with now how to actualize that anxiety into action and how I've used that to move into action and create intensity.
Mm.
Um, but our relationship has a lot more flow. I really enjoy it, and I'm able to just settle into that. that's a lot. So let me stop here for a
Mm,
second, and I can talk more about it. But what I don't want to
that's great.
lose you.
It's really clear the work that you've done to understand your own emotions. It sounds like, the way you speak is probably, more with more depth and more specificity about the different emotions you feel. So it's clear that you've gone from potentially, like we all do, like projecting some emotion on someone else, or to really experiencing it inside yourself. And it sounds like that's been a big part of the journey of like going from maybe reacting to emotions to being more in touch with them and feeling them inside. And like you're saying, even experiencing them as a flow and not something that you run away from. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, I would say probably the greatest, the biggest turn in the last 8 to 9 months has been for me as a five to experience the incredible reservoir of emptiness, sadness, loneliness that can be stored in my body and stored in my, kind of understanding, and sitting with that and figuring out how to interact with the parts of who I am, to feel that through my body, and then to sit and move through that. Those have probably been the biggest uh, doorways or portals for growth at this particular time. Um, and that's created a lot more internal trust and a lot more openness.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. Um, I see many fives, and I do have a bit of this experience in myself. Coming from an experience of being super calm and having all emotional tone inside under control, and actually being the opposite of being anxious until they come to this work and they realize both that there was some anxiety inside and they were disconnecting from it. Um, and as the five stays more in touch with feelings, anxiety actually rises because we describe fives as having fear of feelings. And at least this is what comes to me. I see this a little bit in myself, but also in many fives. But would you say that this is your case or that you always had this more anxious nature?
I always, yes, because I did, as an only child in my family system, it really was a system in which we had to fend for ourselves. Everybody had to take care of their own needs. So there was not a lot of co-regulation and calming in that space. And so it was really about, I had to disconnect, dissociate from that anxiety. I had a lot of deep feelings, longing and desire as a child, and so very rarely did those two things meet. They were kind of this longing, this desire, this deep want that existed for me, and then also this really high level of anxiety that I could press down and kind of put away. I think what I ended up doing, and I'm still working through this now, is the way I would allow those feelings to come, then I would feel this anxiety, and then I would kind of almost press them down to create intensity. And then I would use that as a driving force that
Hmm.
would disconnect me from my emotions and from my anxiety. It was, so I would almost kind of compress them, judge them through judging, and in this inner critic side of who I was. Oh, this just isn't going to do me any good. There's just no good. We've got to get up and do something. Let's move this way. And so I use that energy to develop anger, and then use that to push me forward.
Interesting.
So I think
Mhm.
for me, I had access to kind of some of those fourish emotions, that depth and longing and desire. I also had the six-ish kind of feel of anxiety there. But I
Mhm.
think my survival mechanism was I would try to sleep, or I would try to dissociate, or I would push them down until I couldn't. And then I would use judgment and internal criticism to kind of build capacity to move forward towards something.
Right.
Hmm.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting to listen to you. I've a slightly different experience of that. I think it may be a subtype difference and a few other, things grow, in our growing up. But one thing that you also talked about that is related to this is sensitivity. And this is something that I would like to explore because many people don't know this about fives. Would you explain how exactly you see yourself as being sensitive as a five, but you don't necessarily show?
Right. Um, I think just working back into it, I think intensity is a great way for me to hide sensitivity, right? So I
Mm.
can show up, have have energy, have drive, play a part, be funny, be sad. I can do these things all as ways to kind of mask that sense of sensitivity. Um, I don't, I don't, I don't know any other way to talk about it at the moment except through vulnerability
Yeah.
and being able to allow myself to feel my nervous system and just feel the presence of what's around me and not try to turn it into something.
How do you feel when people don't see that and don't meet you in that sensitivity, especially given that it's so hard to put it outside?
Right. I'm a lot more understanding of what I'm not presenting to people most of the time. So I realize that I can have a double expectation of people, that I want them to meet me in a way that I'm not showing up as a test to see if I can show up that way. So
Mm.
people don't know that if people don't know that I am playing poker to see if they're going to fold and show their hand before I show mine.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so part of the work now more for me is to make a sensitive statement. And this has, in a world in which masculinity is really trying to work itself out in a lot of ways, you know, I think it's a part of being able to understand that showing sensitivity, tilting my cards, letting people see what's going on inside of me, a fear, a sadness, a grief, a joy, a happiness, a celebration, that often I have, it's important that I lead with that and show my hand in appropriate and safe ways, and then let people see what that is, because I can sit with people and realize that I'm holding my cards and I'm expecting them to be sensitive
Mm.
and thoughtful, and they don't realize that that's what's
Mhm.
happening.
Right. Great description. I also think it speaks a lot to the sexual five.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I want to connect, I want that part of what that is. And I think in terms of just being able to and at first I thought, oh, if I show the sensitivity, then it's a weakness, right? Like then I'm, but vulnerability isn't weakness, right? It isn't. There is a substance to deep vulnerability. There is a substance to feeling your emotion. You can be substantial in a moment, um, and that is a strength that can hold space. And I think before, um, I didn't I didn't realize that. I would judge
Mm.
it or see it as a liability, not as a resource to where I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah, the thing is that many times us fives feel resentful or hurt in the inside when, after so much effort, um, the other person doesn't really get it. And but I don't know if you experienced that earlier in life before doing inner work, or if it's just different for you.
I think that's part of the drive, just to never play my hand. You
Hmm.
know,
Okay.
I didn't grow up, being as sensitive as I was as a child and being in all the energy that I grew up in. Um, I think part of my expectation is, it feels very, in some ways, slightly forced. That there's no one's ever really going to understand, right? Like
Mm.
I'm gonna, and that's a trap, right? As a five, to always create a level of distance, like it's almost a self fulfilling prophecy. right?
Yeah,
Like, I'm going to show you, but you're just not going to understand. And I
exactly.
can contribute to that.
Hmm.
So being able to settle into that and allow people to know me to the level at which they can know me and just be okay. That's our
Yeah,
relationship. That's where
exactly.
we are. And so that's also very helpful for me. So now when I meet people, and some people, they're very, very deep and emotional people who have great depth and capacity. And I'm not at that place where I can be in that with them. And so it's just letting relationships be where they are and the intimacy develop in whatever that is. And
Mm.
that's been a lot more helpful to me. I don't have to have an expectation.
Very beautiful. I love it. It's more like following the flow instead of having that craving for having something, which comes from avarice, the passion of lives.
And I think that that would be something where, and I realize this in terms of just my ability to connect with people individually. Like that's what my coaching practice is on. That's what I did as a pastor. You know, is that I can sense people's energy. I can read. I can reflect and kind of mirror back to people and do all that. But earlier in my life, I could see where I would be drawing energy from them. I would be drawing emotional connection from them, even without them realizing it. I would be kind of siphoning off some of that connection. And instead of being upfront and honest, hey, I want to be your friend. I really would love to connect. You really are important to me. How can we spend more time together? And I just didn't have the tools or trust myself to sit in those moments and be that vulnerable.
Wow, as I hear you say those phrases, I'm find myself super impressed.
It's practice. It's a practice.
Uh, it sounds like I don't know. The impression I'm having is that in many different ways, at different points, you've really confronted your fears and overcome them. Like when you're talking about these certain things that you've accomplished, I think, well, wow, I mean, that's can be scary for a lot of people, not just fives. But it sounds like you've, in some ways, really consciously confronted some of your fears and your barriers and have overcome them. Maybe a little bit easier if you're, being a sexual five, because there is that. Do you experience as a sexual five that deeper need for intimacy? Like certainly we're hearing that in the longing that you said that you felt starting from early on. Do you think that that sort of motivates you more in some ways to open up some sort of channel to deeper connection with some people?
Hmm. Yes, yes, that's true. I think I didn't think I didn't understand what it was at the time.
Mhm.
I didn't
Yeah.
understand what it was, but now, yes, there are moments in which, and I have to be mindful of that, right? Um, that people aren't ready for that kind of connection, and there are boundary issues there. And as a sexual five, as a sexual dominant, merging is really important. And I had, so being just, we did some really good work with boundaries and energetic boundaries the last retreat that I was able to attend in London. And so really holding space, checking my energetic boundaries, holding that sense of integrity has been really helpful. But yes, those things are important. And I have to be careful of the romanticism of that. I could just romanticize that away, get really involved in it. I will say, I think probably over the last 6 months, and I'm not sure if how I feel about this yet, but really what I've decided is that the longing that I really have is for a more intimate relationship with myself.
Mm.
So the drive to confront, the courage, is that there's a part of me that I forfeited for so long to be in this personality. And so a lot of my fear and anxiety is put into a different perspective now, because I realize that I can use that to a healthy extent, that sexual energy to really go, oh, I am really pouring in and want from somebody or from something or from this place really what is the deeper longing for my own sense of self.
Mm.
So how much do I know how I feel? How much, and I have to be careful because I can feel that can be a loop, but I also just really try to turn a more authentic um, posture toward myself. And that's been really helpful to me.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, very beautiful. Um, I think that might connect to another important thing you said about the emptiness. Uh, in a way, I see that the growth path for fives has a lot to do with confronting the emptiness. That is a natural consequence of not receiving, not giving, and having to hoard stuff inside. And then the difficulty in having intimacy with self, at least for me, was being in touch with that pain. And it's a lifelong process, but I think it's essential, and it's not easy for a five to get there because it's very abstract, very emotional, and it confronts a belief that by hoarding knowledge will never be empty of anything, right?
Mm-hmm. The you know, whenever I remember growing up, my dad had a very flat affect, and um, I always wanted my dad to know me. I wanted that. I wanted him to be interested in me because I saw the energy that he poured out in other ways than other places. And one of the things that I remember experientially was just the openness and the emptiness and the sensitivity to me go together. They're connected. That emptiness, it just creates a lot of space to take in and to experience what's going on around me without me pushing something out into the world. That's my experience of it. So the emptiness is really where a lot of my greatest sensitivity is, because there's just something that's not there. But leaning into that, feeling it in my body, feeling the aching, like reeling how I somaticize that in my core, um, the tears, the longing, all that came from that, and then just for me, just my mental like kind of pictures of my dad's flat affect, and just the emptiness was for me the wanting of that connection that didn't take place in a way that I could understand. And so it was almost just like a void formed within me from what could have been present in that space. So being present, seeing and understanding some of those things, and those things only make sense inside of me. I can't really put them in an organized way. Really helped me sit with the emptiness and really create a space for openness. Now, the emptiness is a doorway for me to openness. Um,
Yeah.
the other part of the emptiness too, or the other part of just experiencing loving intimacy with myself, is just really being, really, oh look, I got a body. Hey, I am a body. I'm in a physical format. I have an emotion. I have feelings. I have a sense of where I am. I am in this world. And I think the knowing of a five, I think really being able to know my physical presence has been really helpful, and paying attention and honoring that.
Yeah, certainly.
Those are just a lot of random thoughts, but those are just some of the tidbits of my experience in that.
Yeah.
And how has your five journey impacted the work that you do? I know that you've said you're a Christian pastor. I know you do other work as well with leaders and teams. And um, how have you seen yourself growing in the work you do? Like you said earlier, you had a burnout at one point. Sounds like that was a big experience, especially in terms of your growth and initiating a lot of growth. But how have you seen you how have you watched yourself engaging in your work in different ways or in growing ways as you've transformed as a five?
Well, first of all, I have to, everywhere I go, I have to give a disclaimer for every other five in the room. Hey, look, I'm sorry ahead of time. Like I've got to tell you, I've got to tell everybody all the things we don't want to say. Right.
Giving away some type 5 secrets here, yeah.
Exactly. Right. Because most fives are in horror, they both love it and they're in horror.
Yeah.
I think probably one of the biggest shifts for me in my work really has come from your teaching. Um, there had come a time when someone said, type nines really in health have more energy than any other number, right? Because they have access to all their energy as they bring that forward. And then I think over the last couple of years, that's been something that we've talked about in terms of fives as well. That when fives aren't protecting and compartmentalizing, they can bring more energy and embodied presence into the moment. I think for me as a five, the way I built trust and the way I led and the way I showed up for people is I would disappear and create all this space for the people around me. And that was, people wanted safety. People wanted to be known. People long for there to be, asks a person 3 questions in a row, and that's more than's going to happen to them in a week, right? So people love that about the safety, the objectivity, and all of that. And so that really led a lot of, my work, dissociated presence, all that people loved. I think now in my work, I get to show up too, and I get to meet and connect and be present fully with people. And there's a different texture to the safety that's created there. There's a different texture to the space that I share with people. Not that I vacate the premises and dissociate and then do that, but there's a texture to a space we create together. And to be able to bring the mental aspect of what that is, and then to bring the emotional aspect of what that is, and then to be fully in my body and to feel energy and to know I have all the energy I need to hold space, whether it's with a team or with an individual or whatever I'm doing. It's just changed the fabric of how I connect and relate to people. So I would say that's probably the most foundational piece. And I don't ever doubt the energy I can bring into a room. I don't doubt that anymore. If someone needs to think, we can think. If someone needs to feel, I can sit there and feel with you. If we need to get active, my body can hold that energy. And if you would have told me 5 years ago that could be a possibility, I'd have called you liars. Like I couldn't have believed that. But it's through the growth path that we've worked on.
And what was it like for you before this transformation, like 5 years ago or more?
I felt, now I have to be, I want to be very compassionate to that Chris, because he only knew what he knew at that time.
Yeah.
And he only had the skills and he was doing the best that he could. But when I look back, I could see everything that I was trying to do to survive life and to play out the roles that I thought I needed to, and really playing this game of how can I get what I need without having to ask, and how can I do all these things. And it felt, I didn't know life could feel like it does now. And I didn't know that there was such flow to life. And it just gives me a lot of compassion for what I was trying to do for so long, which was, just I was dissociated most of the time. I was really not physically present. I was exhausted, and I was so just trying to keep everything spinning so that I could meet whatever needs people had. And it was really hard to feel like I was a victim in my own life in so many ways. And I'm just thankful for all the ways that I was able to, and all the people. I think that's the funniest thing about five sometimes. When we're in personality, we're like, we're doing this all on our own. Nobody's, I'm having to do all this. And all the people that were propping me up and supporting me and loving me and getting me to where I was. But today, just to know that this type of life is available, and that fives can experience this, and that people can, especially in the world in which we live today. I'm just really grateful for that. But yes, I was more dissociated, more just playing out roles, and really frantically, anxiously trying to get my needs met behind the scenes of almost every relationship with the church, with, in my marriage at the time. And that was a really hard life.
I love how much compassion you have for the guy that you were before you changed so much. I think that's a beautiful model for everyone, and certainly we constantly let people know in this in this work of transformation, we need to be compassionate with ourselves. We need to recognize, hey, we're often just doing the best we can, not realizing how much harder we're making life for ourselves just because we're in personality, and the personality operates that way at that level. And it's beautiful hearing the evolution and how embodied you are and how welcoming you are of your own emotions and your own connection with yourself, in a completely new way that you've been able to achieve.
I, I think, if you'll let me say one more thing.
Yeah.
I have a business partner, and she's a self-pres 3, and and she's, in our work together, we've had to deal with money and things like that, and talk about those types of business dynamics, and that's been a very helpful relationship too. And one of the things that I really have tapped into is that for fives, there's safety and secrecy, right? That's another way to say it.
Hmm.
So in our secrecy, in our withholding, that's safety for us. And I think both in that relationship, especially, my dad owned his own businesses for so long, but he never trusted anybody. He never had a partner. He would never do that. And so when I made the decision to bring a partner on and to really begin to work some of that, trusting someone, opening up, it really was finding that there's safety in connection, and not just safety in secrecy. And
Mm.
so the shame that I felt, the guilt that I experienced, all those things were parts of how I tried to stay in connection with people. Um, but really the vulnerability, the openness, those conversations, those have also been really important. But I think for most people, they don't understand that for fives, and Uranio, you can give me your experience of this, is that there is just safety in secrecy. There is just safety in withholding. And when we trade that safety in for vulnerability and connection, I don't think we realize how much is available to us in that. Is that fair, Uranio? I don't know what you would.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying now, and I think it links back to something else I wanted to to ask you about, which has more to do with the sexual five, actually, which is not having expectations from people. Now, I think it's for all fives, and but even more so for a sexual five. It's the idealization of people, and not expecting anything is so tricky because there is the other thing that fives do of I won't expect anything from you because I'm disconnecting from you, and it's more like I won't I won't I won't have any expectations from you because you hurt me or because you can't do it or whatever. But it's very different from what I'm seeing in you, which is I'll remain open to whatever comes my way. And if something doesn't come, I see that as the flow of life. In my Enneagram language, I would say I won't engage in the avarice of wanting something from you after the poker game, right? So it's a very delicate balance, and it's important, in my view, in my own observation, to remember that avarice is not only being close to giving and receiving; it's also that craving for having something and to hoard that when we get it, and when we don't, then reacting with things like um, resentment or hurt. But I think I'm hearing very good things from you regarding that. What do you think?
Yes, I think, my experience of expectations is, I think where I am now is that I realize those deep emotional needs that I have. I know they're there, and when I recognize them, I what I tell myself now is it's not humanly possible for anybody to meet those needs.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, so for me to bring those into a relationship, whether it's professional or personal, I can't expect, and I have to be careful about idealizing my own expectations of myself. So
Mm,
I'm human. I have these deep emotional needs, wounds, wherever. I can work with those. I can also understand when they're appropriate and when they may be idealized. And I can deal with the grief in that. And I can do that with other people. Because if not, especially for me, and I don't know if this is the right language, but I can get in the push and pull of a relationship. Like, I think that's part of what my subtype can do is I can hook somebody or get hooked in, and then I'm in the push and pull of building intensity and energy and expectation and not and when I'm able to just be more present and conscious about that, then I can be like, okay, okay, let's just take a deep breath. What's real? What's human? And what's not idealized? And that
Mhm.
that's a great way to articulate. I don't think I've had the words for that.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. Yeah. I think I love interviewing fives because of the depth, but I also run the risk of asking very deep questions. I don't know if there is anything that our listeners would like to know about fives in a more, objective way. What do you think people don't people are usually ask you about being a five, or they are interested in knowing? What do you think?
Um, the most consistent I tell people more now, and I did this before even when I thought I led with self-pres, is I'm probably not your typical five. So when you're talking to me, because this has happened in a couple of different places, I've had people go, well, my son's a five, or my daughter's a five, or my partner's a five, and I'm really doing this. Tell me what's going on. And I'm like, well, I can give you an idea, but I'm probably not the person. I am the five, along with Ivy and maybe a couple of others that are here at the retreat. There's not many of us showing up here. So, uh, I think probably we're way more sensitive. We're either like cats or deer, right? Like we're kind of like we'll step out, we'll step back. We're really kind of so we're kind of skittish because trust is such a huge issue. But even though we're skittish, we're incredibly sensitive. And so you just have to pay attention because there's a lot more going on inside of us than you know.
Mm.
And um, and so that sense of sensitivity and skittishness in relationships is really important. And the other thing I would say is we really and Ronnie, you'll give me your experience on this. Most fives in personality are really working hard to minimize their needs to decrease the level of interdependence that they need, as a way sometimes of control, and are usually busier than you realize getting their needs met in other ways.
Mm.
Like they're not going to ask for what they need. They're going to try hard. And so fives are really working hard to diminish both their expression of need, but also working really hard to get their needs met. So sometimes you just have to pull a thread from a five. Hey, what'd you do? What was that about? Because they're really working hard to not be exposed in their vulnerability. Um, because at the end of the day, and we think our problems are too much. Like the people that we grew up with couldn't handle us in some ways, or the problems or the things that we need, and so we work really hard to live a life.
Well, I think I agree with you, and I think it's a complex thing. The way I sometimes describe it is we simplify our lives. We don't want to create codependency, and at the same time, we do have lots of expectations from others that we don't even know we have. And when people don't meet those expectations, there is that initial resentful thing. So it's something like, I'm all independent. I don't want codependency, but there is this little kid inside eager to having expectations met. So it's very complex for people to understand, and yeah, and even to explain that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and it's sometimes we're one-ish, in that sometimes ones in their internal expectation of what they want, they don't know till they're in the moment, and they have that body reaction. They're like, no, no, that's right or that's wrong, and I think that's really helpful for fives. People don't know that we have expectations of them sometimes until we're in a moment, and we didn't even realize it until we're gruff or abrupt or kind of whatever we're feeling in the moment. And then, it's not like we could have told them because we didn't know it until that moment sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah, and it's easy for a five to feel hurt. The difference is that we are not hard types and we run away from feelings. So as soon as we get hurt, poof, there's an extra degree of disconnection.
we take our toys and go home
Yeah,
emotionally. So we may still be there, but we're definitely not there emotionally as we were. Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. It's sometimes said about sexual fives that you mentioned idealizing relationships, that they're kind of looking for that ideal relationship such that it's hard for anyone to pass the test. And there is testing, are you going to be available and open enough yourself for me to trust you and open up? Have you experienced that now that you've kind of clarified that you're more of a sexual five?
Um, yes, I can sense the longing and the desire for someone to check all the boxes. And
Mm.
that could be a friend, it could be a coworker, it
Mhm.
can be, and part of that I feel again is a sense of safety. Like if I'm going to trust you, and I think, look, I don't know how to describe this in subtype language, but if I'm going to give myself to this, if I'm going to really connect this vulnerable side of who I am, I really want to know that you can meet me in that place because, and sometimes I'm not sure I bring all those things to the table, but I definitely want you to be able to bring those things to the
I
table.
like the way you put
Right.
that. Yes.
I'm not always a good sense of how I'm showing up and what I'm able to do. So sometimes back to idealizing myself,
Mm.
I just put a lot of energy and expectation that, look, if I'm going to lean into this, what are
Mhm.
you bringing to the party? and
Mhm.
uh, and then can we do that? And so again, the comparing and the push pull and the testing, again, that's just a part of that sense. And part of that's just because I want to, in my subtype, I want to build some intensity and I want to get that energy, because if I don't get it, then it's dead. Yeah, that's the
Mhm.
part, right? Like energy could, without energy flow, even that sense of ease can feel like, are we really alive here? Is there energy here? And in my subtype, I have to be careful because that idealization builds intensity for me sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really clear. That's really clear. And I also appreciate you speaking earlier to that part of you that wants to be understood and met, but also has believed that that can happen, and how you've come to see that as, in some ways, a potential self-fulfilling prophecy. Have you been able to let in that understanding? Have you been able to realize that and get out of that sort of trap of it can never happen, and so I, in some ways, don't allow it to happen?
Probably the way where I am in the moment is I allow, what I say to myself now is I can, I probably can meet people where I'm able to meet myself. So the compassion, the emotional vulnerability, the openness I can have about my needs, about what I'm doing, that sense of compassion, just like we kind of experienced earlier, I let that be kind of right now in my understanding the guiding way of knowing how much I can probably show up for other people,
Mhm.
and be present. So I do feel like I can relax into that a little bit more,
Mhm.
um, and feel. Gosh, I don't know how not to do this, but I don't need that fierce independence, and I don't, and I can just relax and let people be who they are, and I'll be who I am. And I think it's the most vulnerable place to be. It's the scariest place to be. To just be in that moment and know that whatever happens, there's a whole reality supporting me and supporting them, and that I have the resources to handle this. And it's just really trusting there's a more abundant ecosystem around us,
Mhm.
and that takes the energy of the end all and be all of what it needs to be.
Mhm.
I don't know. Does that translate?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as you're speaking, I think what you're saying applies not only to fives, although certainly to fives, but to a lot of us. No matter what our type is, can we see the complex? Can we see the defense, um, in all its complexity for each of us, and sort of relax that a little bit and be able to be more open in the moment, both with ourselves and allowing our vulnerability to be there and allowing ourselves to really receive somebody else as they are, and not react so much. And so I think the way you describe that for yourself as a five, I think it's beautiful, because I think what you're describing is something that's the relaxing of all of the different defense mechanisms and personality as defense complexes.
And the ability, like, just even saying all of that, feeling that, and then just being able to sense back into my own body and be like, yeah, that's true.
Hmm.
That's what I always, that's often what I have to do. My mind will carry me way far out into this place, and then I have to go, okay, my mind took me all the way out there,
Hmm.
but are my how are my feelings about that, and then where's my body in that, and then how do I understand and feel. And so that's also another part of me that I'm trying to learn how to do, is not let my mind get so far out that my body's left behind, or that my emotions are there. And so yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's also really nice to see how connected you are to your body and your heart, as well as your, highly accomplished head.
Well, and I'm really grateful because I trust the two of you immensely. And so it really allows me not only to feel my own sense of personal safety, that I can handle myself in this moment and be vulnerable, but that I trust the the relational capacity we have. And so that allows me also to show up like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's an honor to be trusted.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really appreciate all your sharing, Chris, and yeah, and exchanging things and learning from you too.
Any last things, Chris, that we haven't asked about that you may want to share with our listeners?
I think we've covered a lot, and I've really
Yeah.
enjoyed it. One of the things earlier on, maybe a few years ago, that really was helpful to me, as a five, was the idea that preparation is really important. So I always want to study and learn. And I even felt, before I got on the call, I could feel my anxiety rising a little bit. I could feel myself being more in touch with my anxiety, because I'm
Mhm.
like, oh no, I don't know what I'm going to say. What are we going to ask? How's this
Mm.
going to be? Right. And I could feel that sense come up. And I remember someone saying to me one time, Chris, as a five, what you have to understand is sometimes the answers that you need aren't going to be available until you're in the moment.
Mm.
And so just even being here with you and sensing in and talking about these things, I think for some fives, it's trusting that there's the knowledge that we try to hoard and know, that there's also this relational knowledge that you're not going to have the resources you need until you get to that moment, or the answer that you need until you get to that moment.
Mhm.
And trusting that in relationship is the energy, in the give and take is that. And sometimes you're not going to know the answer, you can't study the answer, ChatGPT isn't going to give you the answer until you get to the moment, and then the answer will arise. And I think trusting that's also been very helpful to me.
I think in some ways what you're talking about is also the essence of spiritual faith in some ways. That you can't plan ahead for everything. And if you do, then by definition, you're in the personality, you're in your ego. And that really having faith is just showing up in the moment. Like you say, trusting that what you need to say, what you need to feel in the moment will be there.
I agree with you, B, that to a good extent, it's what Almas calls basic trust, also, or or what you're describing as faith. But I do see that there is something else for fives, which is learning how to flow with life instead of, and it has to do later with the virtue of non-attachment. Um, so I just think it's not only for relationships, it's for everything, like how you work or how you walk on the street, and like really being open to that flow as it comes instead of planning so much.
There's just a difference between unattachment and detachment, right? When I
Mhm.
think of detachment, I think of like dissociative, right? I'm detaching from the moment. Unattached is, hey, let's just, whatever's flowing here, and that that allows me to feel and to be present. So that's all I was going to say.
Right. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's a good note to end on, the difference between detachment and non-attachment, the virtue of non-attachment and the personality habit of detaching. Really crucial and central, I think, for fives. So thank you so much, Chris, for being in conversation with us, sharing so much, helping us understand type 5 and sexual 5 subtype. Really appreciate you as a member of our community and a dear, dear friend on the path and student of the system. So thank you for being you.
Yeah. Thank you,
That's
Chris.
all I can be.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And I just appreciate the space that you've created. And I appreciate all of our work and how you've been really critical, just amazing spiritual guides with me. And I don't think I'd be here today if it weren't for the two of you. So I'm very grateful for you.
Thank you, Chris, so much. Thank you. Okay, so that does it for this episode of the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. We hope that you'll join us next time for another episode where we talk about all things Enneagram.